first of all, I would like to thank so much Noam Chomsky for having making the time to talk about Julian Assange with us. It's of extreme importance, his voice, in particularly within Americans. But he has also inspired so many people internationally, like me, from the middle of nowhere of Brazil. I have his books and I know who he is. So his voice has an enormous capillarity and is a voice of hope for many generations.
Very pleased to be with you.
So the first question that I have to ask is, Julian Assange could be extradited in a few weeks' time if the English Supreme Court refuses to hear his appeal. Julian Assange has never been charged with any crime in the UK, and the extradition treaty between the UK and USA prohibits extradition for the so-called political offense under which Assange has been charged. So, Mr. Chomsky, how do you analyze the role of the British courts in these extradition proceedings so far?
The British courts have behaved much as the British government has throughout, basically following the demands of the United States. There is, if you want to get into the legalistic details, which I frankly don't think are very relevant, but if you want to get into them, then there is a question, technical question, about whether he's being charged with a political crime or whether he's being charged with a technical crime about using a password illegitimately and so on, which is what, of course, the lawyers will claim. But the fact of the matter, quite apart from the legal maneuverings, which are a cover for winning, the fact of the matter is he's being charged with the essence of the charge is that he released information that major newspapers used, but that the US government wants suppressed. You can cloak that in all kinds of legalistic chicanery, but that's what lies at the heart of it. The British government had no justification for effectively imprisoning him for years in the Ecuadorian embassy. What he was charged with was a triviality, not paying bail on time, but for that he was essentially locked into an apartment, which is what the embassy is, couldn't go outside, surrounded by police. All of this is outrageous behavior. Being put in a top security prison is another outrage. The UN rapporteur on torture was quite correct to call it administration of torture. So there's two levels on which you can do this. One is the technical level of the exact nature of the crime for which the US government charging him. The other is what's really happening. It's the second that's important.
Mr. Chomsky, from your analysis, do you think, is there any chance for Julian Assange to win this case legally in the British courts?
Depends how narrow the US charges are. So, for example, if he's charged under the Espionage Act, then this basically is blatantly unconstitutional. It has never come before the courts to evaluate its constitutional status, but for over a century, it's been applied freely, extensively. President Obama went beyond all previous presidents combined in his uses of it to control information. But if there was an honest, serious Supreme Court, they would never allow it to stand because it's so blatantly in violation of fundamental constitutional principles. But that has nothing to do with whether it can succeed in the courts. That's a separate matter. The law has its own ways of proceeding. And if the charges are framed very specifically and narrowly by careful legal experts, they will try to shape it so that it doesn't look like a political crime, but it looks like a technical matter, like using a password when you shouldn't, or something like that. That's what lawyers are paid for.
Do you consider that the case of Assange is a case of lawfare?
Is it a case of lawfare? It's a case of using the technicalities of law in order to punish someone who has committed of releasing to the citizens of the United States information that they have a right to have and should have, and that the government wants to keep secret. That's the issue. There's a background issue. It's been stated in many ways over the years. One professor of government at Harvard University, Samuel Hunting, power remains effective when it is in the dark. Exposed to the sunlight, it begins to evaporate. Well, Julian Assange exposed power to the sunlight. Powerful systems don't want to see their power evaporate. So therefore they can cloak this in legalistic language to distort what's happening, but that's the essence of it.
And WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, Christian Rabson, he was received by President-elect Lula less than a week ago and had no hesitations in calling Assange previously as a hero, and he offered to WikiLeaks full support in Assange's cause. A day later, Prime Minister of Australia, Albanese, breaks his silence and for the first time as a Prime Minister declares that the persecution against Assange must end. So a breakthrough, because Australia has been very quiet so far. Do you think it's a coincidence or those two facts are related?
I think it's not really a coincidence. There is a widespread condemnation of the way Assange has been treated and of the impending extradition. So there are now voices speaking out against it, including the 5 major journals which used WikiLeaks material extensively, and I must say have a pretty poor record themselves as the way they've dealt with this, but they finally came out with a joint state, not adequate, but fine. Case of Albanese is very significant. Assange, of course, is an Australian citizen. Australia has not stood up for his rights as they should have all along. One leading Australian strategic analyst, political commentator, called a sub-imperial power subordinated to the United States doesn't step on the toes of the master, quoting, and as a leading analyst and a political scientist in Australia. But finally, Albanese made a mild statement, which is better than nothing, but should be much stronger. Lula's statement is very important. He has prestige, rightly, and to throw his weight into this controversy is a positive sign.
So I'd like to turn back a bit to President Lula. So we all know what these elections means to Brazil. It's the possibility, it's a turning point in history where Lula has won a hybrid warfare, and there is the possibility for the country to recover democracy again. So, but I would like to know what you think that Lula's elections may mean for a world where the far right is still on the rise.
Brazil is the most important country of Latin America, of course. So what happens in Brazil has much broader implications. But Lula's victory and the several examples of steps towards reversing the right-wing ties in years. Petro in Colombia is another, or in Chile is another. The Lula's election, I think, will strengthen their hands. So there is Fernandez in Argentina. There's conflict. There's a constant conflict in Latin America, and Lula is of extreme importance in carrying this forward. So I think he's facing serious obstacles and problems, but his election is a powerful, significant figure, and I think he can make a very positive contribution towards bringing Latin America, moving it in a more progressive direction.
So my last question to you, what do you think would be the main challenges that Lula may face at international level? Internally, we think it's the financial capital who already uses global TV to put pressure on the government. But at the international level, what are the challenges for Lula, in your view?
There are plenty of internal challenges. The country is split, Brazil, almost 50-50. There's strong internal forces that are strongly opposed to Lula, passionately opposed. Large part of the population in the evangelical churches includes working people in the areas where illegal logging and destruction of the Amazon is their source of support. A couple of provinces that Bolsonaro won with working class support. Destruction of the Amazon is total disaster for Brazil and catastrophe for the world. But poor people who have nothing except the chance to make a little money by destroying the Amazon don't see it that way. They don't want to believe it. They'll just go ahead. There are logging, mining, agribusiness forces that are strongly opposed to Lula. They're a conservative business community is kind of split. They don't like Lula's policies. On the other hand, they don't like Bolsonaro's craziness, which is like in the United States, where the investment community, the basic capitalist community supports Republican policies, but don't like Trump. He's a disruptive influence. They'd rather have somebody who supports carries through interests in a polite and non-disruptive manner. And I think the same is true in Brazil. That's internally. Then there's internationally. The international investment community very much favors preceding administration, which was extreme. And Paulo Guedes, the Minister of Economy, very simply, he said, just privatize everything. I mean, give everything in Brazil away, give it away to private capital, international capital, so they can enrich themselves. It's called neoliberalism. So naturally, they like that. Every time you work in the interest of the poor, the stock market collapses, it all goes down. Those are the same in Colombia, same in Chile, same anywhere that any forces concerned with the population will raise their voices. Same in the West. Take England. Take what happened to Jeremy Corbyn. Soon Jeremy Corbyn came along and tried to turn the Labour Party into an authentic political party, formation of policy, and where the party policies would be designed in the interest of working people and the poor. Extremely successful. 2017, Labour under his leadership had the biggest victory it's had in memory. But the establishment across the board, all the way to the Guardian, came down on him, scraping the bottom of the barrel and inventing ways to defame him and destroy him. They were simply not going to tolerate a political organization that actually responds to the needs of working people and the poor, and is not under the control of political elites. So they virtually destroyed him. In fact, he's been almost expelled from the Labour Party for trying to achieve this. And there were similar attacks against Bernie Sanders in the United States, not quite as extreme. He's managed to survive. That any moderately progressive reformist force will face in Latin America and in fact the rest of the world. We're engaged in constant class war, constant. The masters never relent, are fighting bitter class war. That's what neoliberalism is. Any attempt to confront it from the concentration of wealth and power in the ownership investor class.
Professor Noam Chomsky, thank you so much for giving us your time and to talk about Julian Assange, a political prisoner, maybe the most important political prisoners of the West of our times. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.